angst and creativity do not go next to each other.
Yeah.
And that's something that as a reformed media leader, I've learned the hard way. Bravery, courage, the willingness to go and make a big bet, make a big swing, and then to guide clients to that place. As long as the rigor is there and all the strategy work and a deep understanding of how it's going to impact the business and everything else, like that is important. When people in the advertising community talk about bravery and talk about creativity, it feels like it's in this advertising bubble of we love great work. The reality is the reason we love great work is because great work drives the business.
They say that in advertising, you're only as good as your last campaign. But how do you stay good for 80 years? The answer lies in the delicate chemistry between a creative team and a client. It's about creating an environment where it feels safe to be bold and where humor isn't just a punchline, but a business advantage. Trust isn't just built through a screen, but in person. Today, I'm joined by George Sargent, CEO of Arnold, a leader who has navigated the industry shift from the height of the pandemic to the dawn of the AI era. He also believes that the secret to a brave campaign isn't just a big budget, but the deep, long-term relationships that give brands the confidence to take risks. We discuss why in-person connection still matters, how to nurture the next generation of talent, and what it really takes to solve business problems with creativity. I'm Emma Thumann, and this is Campaign Chemistry. Hi, George.
Hi, Emma. What's up?
Welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm super excited. And we'll just start off super simple. For our listeners, just give a TLDR on your role, what you do day to day.
Yeah, that's great. I'm the CEO of Arnold, and Arnold is a creative agency based in Boston. We have some folks in New York and some folks in other major cities across these wonderful United States. And I took over the role as CEO in 2019, right before COVID. And that's me.
I've always valued the interaction of being in person. Like video call is always nice, but having you here in person is honestly really cool. And I think it's a little bit different because mainly with the people who join our podcast, it's remotely, they video call in, that kind of thing. But that's just my little tangent.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I actually think that this morning I ran into an old colleague on the flight here. I flew here from Boston this morning.
Oh, really?
And, I was sitting in the 6th row and right across the aisle was this person who I hadn't really seen I probably hadn't seen her since COVID. And, there's something, we all know that there's something unique about being in person with someone. And, I think in some ways, something we'll probably talk about on this pod is like real honesty. And there's something about being in person that just breaks down a lot of the trust barriers and raises up the EQ and also makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah.
And it can't always happen and everything else, but I could not be more pumped to be here.
Yeah. So I remember when we spoke briefly yesterday, you wanted to talk more about what Arnold isn't as well known about. And so I want to give you the floor for that.
Yeah, that's great. I think that, Arnold's been around for 80 years. We're in our 80th year. And I think that
this year's 80?
This year's 80. We're founded in 1946 by Arnold Rosoff. And uniquely at the time, that puts us in pretty rarefied air in terms of ad agencies whose brands still exist and businesses still exist today that have been around for that long. And Arnold Rosoff, our founder, his wife, Billy, is still with us. She's 102 or 103 years old. And, Arnold put his first name on the door versus his last name. And I think that decision, and sort of an agency with a first name soul is something that I think has stuck with us, for a long time. We're an agency that really prides ourselves on long-termism, long-term client relationships, campaigns that stand the test of time, that stay fresh, but are, constantly iterating and resonating and breaking through in culture. But, for the Superstore campaign for Progressive with Flo and so many other characters that we all love, we're in our 17th or 18th year with that campaign. I think, the idea of being a place where people can really build creative careers across so many different disciplines that, a modern ad agency needs to span these days. I'm actually the least tenured person on our leadership team.
Oh, really?
And I've been with the agency for 12 years. And so I think that, so much of advertising can be shiny penny chasing, and sort of, the half-life of the advertising life cycle is so short and getting shorter. And I think that Arnold has always been maybe a bit skeptical and a bit cynical. And that's allowed us to really create a longer term value proposition for clients. And I think that's part of the special sauce.
I'm curious, because when you mentioned that Arnold is literally the founder's first name, I feel like, names give things a lot of power. So what do you think is kind of, I guess, like the difference in, I don't want to say energy, but I feel like that's the best way to describe it. Like using a first name to name an agency versus using your last name.
I think it's a really interesting decision. And I think one that feels very modern today. I think that, clearly, if you took it in the most literal sense, one of the most important things that we do, as the bridge between, business objective and, marketing brief and, bringing that to life and meeting consumers where they are, is truly understanding, humanity. And I think that, it signals that. I also, I think probably the foundation of Arnold's real points of difference are the fact that we're not in New York, but Boston is a very sophisticated market with very sophisticated clients, a very sophisticated talent base. And I think the 200 miles northeast of New York, far enough away to be an outsider, but, certainly close enough to the epicenter of culture to understand what the heck's going on in the world. And Boston's a special place. And I think that's really important to who we are.
And then going back to client relationships, because for context, I don't know if it's recently, it was still in 2025. I interviewed an agency in the Midwest, and they were talking about how agencies in the Midwest tend to have like super long client relationships, like up to 30, 50 years. And so what other long client relationships does Arnold have?
Arnold has, I'll give you a couple of other examples. Arnold has a long history of working in tobacco cessation, first for the Massachusetts Department of Health, then as one of the agencies with Crispin Porter that launched the Truth Initiative. And for the last, probably 20, 25 years, working for the Center for Disease Control Office for Smoking and Health. So just, almost 40-year body of work. Another example, again, goes back to, Arnold's, our most recent sort of update as a North Star positioning for the agency is that we make it safe to be brave. And internally, we call it a safe place for brave ideas. The idea of safe to be brave is essentially that the CMO should not have to choose between the smartest thing to do for their business and the bravest thing to do to break through in culture. Those should be the same thing. And to me, that is an anchor that we've set in the marketplace as to who we're for and who we're not for. And I think it again goes into this idea of really an agency with accountability, an agency that understands not just rigor and magic or, preparation and creativity, strategy and creative, but how those two things fully dovetail with each other and intersect to become one thing. And that actually, our previous positioning was built to last. Our previous positioning before that under different leadership teams was Great Work Works, which was around for a long time. But those are all very from the same soul. The value proposition from Arnold has always been creativity to solve business problems, but real proper top of the shelf creativity and a belief that creativity matters and that creativity is the unfair advantage to the CMO and the C-suite in general. And I think we're living and breathing that today. And it's great. You asked before about some of the other stuff we're doing. We're incredibly well known. I'm not sure if we're incredibly well known, but we're well known for our work with Progressive. Again, a relationship that is coming up on 2 decades and campaigns that have been in market for decades as well. And, also a lot of new work in the market. For example, the passive progressive work that I know that you like, that I like too a lot. When we took over the agency, it was following a period where the agency had sort of had lost its mojo a bit. And, when I came into role, Sean McBride became our CCO. He's the longtime leader of the Progressive creative. Val Bettini, who was, Sean and Val are like two peas in a pod, and she was the account lead on Progressive. She's now our chief client officer. And Bree Rossetti came over with me from Havas Media, both sort of reformed media people. Bree less so than me. Bree had bounced around previously in her career in strategy roles across the full gamut. But that leadership team has been in place since, and it kind of probably took us maybe a couple of years to get our legs under us. But in 2023, we won PNC. We rebranded them coming up on 2 years ago as Brilliantly Boring Since 1865. We just put new work into market for Norwegian Cruise Lines, Arnold's return into the cruise industry, following probably one of the categories that has had the most sort of whiplash experience during COVID, a category that really went to zero and then came back incredibly strong with, revenge travel and is now sort of finding itself in that more stable place. And the new work for Norwegian that came out in January reclaims Norwegian's, truly differentiated heritage in freestyle cruising and really as a leveraging emotion and the feeling of freedom at sea to differentiate against a category that really has become, sort of all about the artillery of more. And so we're incredibly proud of that work. We also just launched some work for MaxFly, which is a golf ball brand, golf balls and clubs, but a golf ball campaign celebrating their partnership with Ben Griffin, who's a PGA Tour golfer who won 3 times last year, and came out of nowhere. And so MaxFly's return to the tour ball category, that we're super excited about, that was in the waste management last weekend. So lots of other stuff going on and a lot of stuff that's going to happen over the next couple months where you'll see more from us.
Yeah. I did actually want to talk about the passive progressive just because I really love the Joe's Family Reunion because I remember watching the spot and going, oh God, I've experienced this before with my family reunions. And so and usually when I interview people, when I write about spots, even though I cover agencies, I always try to write it from like an agency perspective. And I also like to know what like the inspiration behind those spots were. Basically what inspired the idea for Joe's Family Reunion.
Every different campaign within Progressive or any other marketer's sort of arsenal is playing a different role in the mix. Passive progressive is really a value and savings message that is incredibly self-aware about the consumer truth that, especially in this category, which is one of the most advertised categories in advertising, that these claims of future savings, there's a lot of skepticism in the marketplace about how valid they are and how they'll apply to you as an individual consumer. And by embracing the behavior of not having progressive and building the story around that, I think we've captured something truly unique. And I think that this latest round of work, including Family Reunion, is we think really good. And, Progressive has always been a brand, especially in partnership probably with Arnold over the last 18 years, that has introduced humor into a category that now we all expect humor from property casualty insurers. That was not always the case. And, leveraging humor as a bridge between what a marketer needs from a business performance standpoint and where a consumer is in their life in between the content that they're watching, on XYZ streaming platform or XYZ live sports. Like that campaign really nails it in terms of, leveraging humor in order to get a business message out there that can be received, given how much messaging there is in the category that can be kind of ill received. And so It's been very effective and we're very proud of it.
Kind of taking all of that, how the messaging gets to the consumer versus the actual marketer, and also referencing the Super Bowl, because the chatter's still going, even if it is dying down a little bit. Was there a spot that you've seen in the Super Bowl that kind of reminded you of that?
I think that if you love advertising, you're constantly trying to reverse engineer what the strategy is and the elegance and craft with which the advertising is sort of, in my view, bridging that gap. And I think that when done well, it's incredible. And when done badly, you can see exactly what they're trying to do and you kind of feel taken advantage of, or or you feel like maybe there's a lack of respect between the brand and you as either current customer or potential customer. I think that, I really loved the Anthropic spot. I think that, it's hard for me even as the CEO of a creative agency to not also be a consumer. And it just hit me with a truth about the category leader, and that people are starting to talk about this idea of this overly positive sort of, agrees with everything you say almost. And people are starting to talk about prompts that sort of, allow for, the LLM to be more critical, which I think is helpful and more honest. And I think that knowing Claude and the recent release of Claude and the advances that they've made, especially in the business to business market, I feel like they have a right to play and a right to call that brand out. And I thought it was really well done by Mother, and I thought it was great. I think that within that category itself, there were some other executions that either felt, that in some ways felt like you could see the strategy and they were trying to weave their, AI product into someone's life. And I always feel a little bit, you have to be very careful with that, because especially with AI, it can feel a bit, everyone has their dystopian radar on so high that even if it's elegant and beautiful and a great story that pulls at the heartstrings, there's the skepticism about the sincerity and this fear. And so I think it's a very interesting category, obviously. And there was so much advertising from that category in the Super Bowl, some of it great, some of it less great.
Dystopian radar. I like that term. That's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the overwhelming consumer sort of the vectors that are affecting so many consumers, I think COVID is still incredibly relevant. I think that a lot of the behavior that I see anecdotally and in research about how consumers are behaving right now is, there's no single reaction, but the fact that we were, sort of, cooped up in our homes for a couple of years. And the reaction to that, I think is affecting everything. And I think that angst about AI, it's sort of like the tale of two cities. It's incredible utility, incredible promise, incredible opportunity. And just, a space that has advanced so quickly.
Oh yeah.
And also it is a lack of certainty and an instability around what's happening in the world and how it's going to affect, us as individuals and future generations as well. And actually, another piece of work I'd love to talk about is ADP. We launched what we call the Next Anything in 2023 for ADP, really going after this idea that ADP offers stability to businesses in a time of instability. And that insight has just gotten more and more true. And I think that we have work that recently came out and more work that's going to come out that again just goes after that idea of, whatever happens in the world, ADP is there and has the scale and stability and the products for small, medium, large businesses to make sure that that the things that really matter, ADP is here to take care of. So I think that that's just one example, but we are operating in a period of great instability. Just look at the ad agency landscape.
Oh yeah.
Even get out of the advertising output world and get into what it's like to be a marketer right now for the clients and what it's like to be on the agency side right now. I would argue the same thing, which is that still wrestling with COVID, and still wrestling with just a period of great angst in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And I think as a leader, it's one of the things that we all have to figure out how to do a great job of making sure that we're relieving that angst. Angst and creativity do not go next to each other.
Yeah.
And that's something that as a reformed media leader, I've learned the hard way. But bravery, courage, the willingness to go and make a big bet, make a big swing, and then to guide clients to that place, as long as the rigor is there and all the strategy work and a deep understanding of how it's going to impact the business and everything else, that is important. I feel like when people in the advertising community talk about bravery and talk about creativity, it's often this sort of, it feels like it's in this advertising bubble of, we love great work, or, sort of this advertisers and agency people talking to themselves. The reality is the reason we love great work is because great work drives the business.
Mm-hmm.
And, demonstrating when you really nail the insight and you really nail the execution, the person on the other side who we're trying to influence feels those things. You understand me. You made something special for me. You're entertaining me. And the value exchange there is attention. And, how we intercept attention with a business message is what we're all doing here.
So you mentioned earlier that there were some things you had to learn the hard way in advertising.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know, what was that specifically, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah. I'll go back. So like I had, I feel like everyone or so many people have a period in their lives, which is sort of the tough period. For me, that was, I would say like, from high school graduation until I was 25. And for much of that time, even though that was, close to 7 years, I was going to college. So I was in college. It's sort of a long and winding road through the college system, which even saying it out loud right now, brings me like, it makes me feel anxious. And, those fever dreams that people have where it's like 3:00 in the morning and they haven't written the paper and the exam is in the morning.
Yeah.
Those things are less fever dreams for me and more like reality. Like those things happened. And it was sort of a scary time. Advertising was sort of my like release valve and where I got my confidence back. I got an internship when I was in college, at Google. And I had this unique opportunity to sort of witness, Google in 2005 in London. And what was happening was, sort of like Google had already established itself, and established search as this, killer app for marketing and for consumers in the US. And they were sort of going to Europe and replicating it. Hiring 50 people a week, the Queen came to the office. Like it was insane. It was like,
that's crazy.
it was nuts. And so I was like fully immersed in this like digital marketing, Kool-Aid drinking, advertising is measurable. And this is all really good for everyone kind of world. And it was very inspiring. And I drank the Kool-Aid for sure. I came back to Boston and then worked in ad sales, first on the publisher side and then on in sort of, a couple of ad tech startups, and then went to the agency side. So I've really I've had a career, and this also goes back to the Boston thing. I've had a career where I've had to bounce around. On the sales side, nobody in New York works for someone in Boston. You don't put the leader in Boston, you put the leader in New York and you put someone in Boston to go run around to the ad agencies in Boston. And so, when I hit that moment in my career, I pivoted over to the media agency side and I showed up on my first day at Havas Media in 2013. And it was funny because I knew a lot of the people at Havas Media because I'd been selling to Havas Media. Mm. And so I sort of knew the people, but really didn't know what they did. Mm. I mean, I understood functionally what role they played in the value chain of advertising, but in terms of the, actual tasks performed at a media agency and how that worked, I was completely lost, but was pretty long into my career. Mm-hmm. And so I really needed other people. And, shout out to Blair Ramsey and Patrick Kelly and Brie Rossetti and so many others and Shay Kelly, and so many others who helped me get there. But I think that I've always been on a steep learning curve in my career because I keep pivoting a little bit. Mm-hmm. Then I spent 10 years doing that, almost 10 years, and then moved over to the creative agency. Creative agencies and media agencies, they might both be agencies, but the work is incredibly different. Mm-hmm. And coming into Arnold as my first time really on the creative side, I was standing next to it for a long time, but I'd never really done it. And then being on the phone with the CMO and them saying, what do you think about the work? Was, everyone go ask your media agency friends what they think about the work. Good luck. And I think so I've really had to surround myself with people who have been incredibly generous and have sort of brought me along. And I do think that I don't know that I've done it intentionally, but it's certainly I think is a good skill to be comfortable. And I'm not sure I'm always comfortable, but to be accustomed to being on a steep learning curve. Mm-hmm. Like I actually think that what I see happening in the marketplace with, the proliferation of certainly of channels. But I think like the lack of definition around what the CMO's role is and the blurry edges of how the CMO's role bumps into so many of their cross-functional peers. I think AI is like an exclamation point on the need for CMOs to see across the mix and figure out how they gain influence within the C-suite and influence so many of their peers and allow their peers to influence them. And I think the same thing on the agency side. I think that you're going to see, I'm not a predictor of how the agency land sort of resets, and it's in the process of doing so right now. But I do think that collaboration across all of these different silos, is only going to become more important. And I think that that's not just because of AI. It's because it's a long time coming. And I think that, having a career where you've not only seen the media side, but you've seen the media side from the sales side, from the tech side, and from the media buying side. And then you've seen the creative side. I still have some gaps that I need to complete, but like you start to build a much more empathetic sort of appreciation for sort of the, what everyone is charged to do and how those forces collide positively and negatively.
Taking all of that, especially always being on a learning curve, what is something when you started out as a CEO in 2019, what is something you wish you knew?
Oh man. It's tough, I'll a shout out to agency leaders. Like it is like the clock is ticking to show results. And I actually think that, I'll speak for me personally. Obviously COVID, was, a tragic and scary health crisis. I think for me as a leader, like the fact that 2 months into leading the agency or 3 months into leading the agency, we were all sent home for 2 years or for however long, I actually think gave us a lot more runway and allowed us to work out some of the kinks that I think if I had to do that in public, if I had done this podcast in March of 2020, I don't think I would have known what to say. I'm not sure I know what to say now, but I think that, like time is underappreciated. And I think that experience is underappreciated. And I think that, it's been a beautiful thing amongst Arnold to have the time together to understand each other, sort of see common threads and really build this thing together. And I'm incredibly, proud of that and also super appreciative to the people around me who have allowed me to sort of make my mistakes and come back from those. And I say that about my peers, but also about our clients. Nobody builds their career on their own. I feel like there's been so much generosity and benefit of the doubt given to me over the course of my career that I feel a huge responsibility to give that back. And I think that's a good vibe. And I think that's how the world works. That's how relationships work. And, it's business and the client situations can be abrupt and tough and everything else. But agencies have always been a place where even in the hard times, and it is hard work, it is relentless. Clients need things yesterday and it doesn't always feel fair, but like you do it as a team and it is fun. And I think that, we have to keep it that way because that's what makes agencies places, like physically and figuratively that I think have in some ways like the naivete and the fearlessness to bring crazy ideas to clients and, crazy ideas that are incredibly well researched and have rigor behind them. But I think that's a special thing.
So that actually brings me to my next question. I wanted to bring up some events that Campaign is doing. We have Campaign Convene coming up later this month on the 25th. And I'm moderating a panel that's based off of Hot Ones, the show. And I'm so excited for it. But one of the questions that I'll be asking the panelists is, what rejected ideas of ads do you wish saw the light of day? So I'm curious what your answer is.
That's an interesting question. I would just like to send a quick shout out to the Progressive team, to the team that has brought Dr. Rick, the parental life coach, into the world, and a shout out to Progressive's in-house agency 96, who brought Dr. Rick onto Hot Ones, which is one of the early brand integrations on Hot Ones, and it was awesome. I think what ideas do I think could have seen the light of day? I thought the idea in Hot Ones is that you start with like the wings aren't super hot, and then you gradually increase the heat.
Well, as you gradually increase the heat, you lessen how intense the questions are, because you're focusing on the pain. It's
an interesting question, and I feel like it's a total cop out, but I really think there's something sacred in the agency client relationship. And I'm a former sales guy, and I think the good part about that, there's a lot of bad parts about it. Ask my peers, but the good part about it is that the client agency relationship is sacred, and you really have to respect it. And I think that of all the stuff that's on the cutting room floor, there's gobs of great ideas. We love every idea we bring, and I think that at the same time, it's not always the right time for that idea. The client's not always ready for that idea. The inner workings of what they're struggling with, et cetera, et cetera. So I tend to think that clients get the idea that they're ready for, and it's up to us certainly to get them ready for things they're not ready for. If they're the smartest, solution in our view, there's a give and take there. And so I have so many in my head right now, but I feel like it's kind of it goes against my philosophy to spill the guts.
What do you mean by that?
I think that there's all these questions out there in the marketplace as to why clients don't bring all of advertising in-house, right? And I think that the number one thing that agencies have to remember is, and especially because there's a lot of agencies, that when a client brings you into their sphere and they tell you things and they share information with you that are the truth of what they're challenged with, it's I feel like we need to have some level of discretion in terms of how we're out there, sharing that stuff. And the idea of if I were to tell you all the things they didn't do but shouldn't have done, I could easily point that back at me, which is, if they should have done it, you should have been able to convince them to do it. And also, I think it's tough to Monday morning quarterback this process. It's the humanity on both sides and the work and the business challenge. It is, and actually, this is one of the things I would just say about Arnold, the number of things that have to be done really well across the client relationship, across strategy, across creative, across production, across business affairs, all the other things that no one even talks about that are behind the scenes, everything, it's like an orchestra. And I think that, it's one of the things I realized when I got to Havas Media. After probably 6 months at Havas Media, and this is for the media folks listening, if there are any of you, media is this is not spiritually how I think about media at all. However, media agencies are a series of handoffs, right? And hopefully not hard handoffs, but they're a series of handoffs. And I have found that, and this is maybe going back 10 years, so maybe it's a little outdated with how media has changed, but probably not. Everyone blames sort of the thing that's a little bit south of what they did. So it's always about, the trafficking team mistrafficked it, and that's why it's broken. And it's well, you know what? I actually think that the way that agencies work is that it's actually truly a team sport. And, everyone needs to take a look in the mirror as to how they took the handoff and how they give the handoff, and how, how much care they put into those moments. And the creative business is much different, and it's much less sort of handoffs and much more sort of swarm and coming together. But I think that both clients and agencies and across the agency, skill sets, everyone is accountable to the end product and everyone is accountable to the process that gets there. And often the process is indicative of the end product. And that's not pointing the finger at clients. It's like, it's across both. And so everyone gets what they deserve. And I think that is true. And I think quite inspiring because it means that if you can create the best team, and I don't just mean the team with the best individuals, I mean the best team, and that team can really come together around a culture of excellence, of accountability, of creativity. And then the client and agency and other agencies, we're often partnered with other agencies in like an interagency team model or other agencies that are owned by Havas or other agencies that are owned by Havas. If everyone can really come together and be like that macro team, it's incredible. And I think that, I think Arnold does a great job of that, of setting the tone for what that culture can be. And I think that like, if you look back at Arnold, the idea of creativity to solve business problems might sound very sort of like, yeah, it's what everyone says. It has been true for a long time at Arnold. We fully are dyed in the wool, obsessed with this idea, and we really haven't erred off of it. And I think that like our ability to, with each other and with partners, with clients, stand up and say that at the beginning of the meeting, maybe not say it out loud, but stand for that is, it sets a tone, and I think has allowed us to sell work that we probably wouldn't have been able to sell if the clients thought that the only reason we were bringing that idea was to go to Cannes, then they would never have bought it. And it wasn't the reason we brought it, but it's so good that we might take it to Cannes. So anyway, next question. Hopefully this one's less hot.
So this is also bringing up another event that Campaign is doing, and it's our first year doing it. It's called Campaign Spark Awards. So it basically recognizes emerging marketers, like those who've worked in the industry for less than 5 years, recognizing those with creativity, agility, unique perspective. So in the spirit of the upcoming Spark Awards, what advice would you give to those who are just starting in the industry?
Yeah, I love that. For one thing, I would just say that it's music to my ears. And I think probably everyone in the industry who's in a position like mine, that we are, the Campaign is recognizing young talent and also seeing the unique value for marketers or agencies in talent that's just starting out. I think that the advertising ecosystem is at a very unique crossroads, not just because of AI, but because of AI, I think. And, there's so much change happening across the advertising ecosystem, the reemergence of independent creative agencies, which is really exciting. And also stuff that's really tough. So much job loss in the marketplace.
Yeah.
It's really tough to get a job in advertising right now. It's really tough to get a job right now.
Yeah.
And so I think that the way we bring this next generation in, I hope, is different than the way we brought the last generation in. And if you consider sort of like Chat GPT, this new era to be sort of like the late 90s, and the introduction of e-commerce and of, in many ways, digital and everything that came with it. I feel like we have an opportunity to like sort of reset. And I would say on both the client side and the agency side, there's a huge opportunity to immerse young talent in the value of creativity and in a deep understanding of the nuances of brand and creativity and culture. And again, to build a talent base that's more transversal. What you see happening right now on the client side is that there's a lot of clients who grew up in digital. And then there's other clients who grew up in traditional, and they can't see eye to eye. It's like, well, you're old fashioned and you don't understand a big idea. And I think that, well, for one thing, if you are a young talent or if you are an experienced member of the advertising community, I think we all need to make sure that we are very intentional about educating ourselves and educating, the organizations that we work in on, the new technology in the marketplace. I always, I'll never forget that my dad, is an architect, and he was probably my age. I'm 44. When he's probably my age, he, started his own firm, and it was right around the time, it was in the mid 80s computer automated design came out. And I remember him telling me in the last few years that when CAD came out, he, was a trained draftsman and he really didn't need to learn it because he had people working for him who understood how to use this new technology and that was fine. And he really regretted that. He could not manage them because he didn't know, he didn't understand the technology that they were using. And I think he really wishes and relayed to me that, even if you're further on in your career, you have to go backwards and make sure that you don't become obsolete. And, I think that some of the more nuanced conversations about when to use AI and how to use AI and, we're sort of at this massive crossroads, which you saw on Sunday in the Super Bowl.
Oh yeah.
Great uses of AI and great, and maybe less more superfluous, uses of AI and certainly the AI industry itself. But I think that everyone needs to know whatever the modern, technologies are of the day. And in this case, this is a technology that's both affecting the marketer in terms of how strategy works, how everything across the value chain works, and also is impacting consumer behavior, massively. And so on both sides, I think that when we are bringing young people into the organization, we need to be intentional also about how we're learning from them. And, even talking to you, Emma, earlier about gaming and your passion for certain video games is we all need to be, we're marketers, right? Our job is to understand consumers and deeply. And, I think that one of the things that we all share in this industry and we should make sure, remains true is a real spirit of curiosity. And I think that those things are all important. Anyway, kudos to Campaign for celebrating young talent at Spark. It's awesome.
This was a really nice conversation and thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, no,
It's great to have you.
I really enjoyed it. And I will say that, in our conversation yesterday, you mentioned this is the first podcast that you've led. I would just say that I think you're a total badass and it takes a lot of guts. I have done 2 podcasts before and I get very nervous and worry about saying the wrong thing. And so podcasts are hard.
Yeah.
And I thought you were awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Cool. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Fitzy.